Hello, hello. A very, very good morning, good evening, good afternoon from whatever part of the world you're logged in. Today on our episode, we have the brilliant Rohan Kondapalli, who's pursuing neuroscience from University of Washington, St. Louis. And I'm very, very excited because this is the very first podcast that we're doing for our med school. So, hey, you all med school guys, this one is for you. If you aspire to get into this, we will walk through Rohan's profile and understand everything that he did in his high school, everything that he's currently doing, all the good stuff for him. So I'm going to pause now and let Rohan give his introduction. Rohan, over to you.
Hi guys, my name is Rohan. I'm a sophomore at WashU. I'm currently majoring in neuroscience and I'm minoring in anthropology. And yeah, I'm on the pre-med track, hoping to go to med school one day.
That's brilliant. So we'll start with the basic stuff. How did you get interested in medicine? It's I think it's an extremely challenging field in general to one get into and continue persisting while you get into it. What got your attention into medicine and solidified your interest that medicine is this is it for me? Was it because your parents are doctors, or what? How did that attention come to you? How do you become sure that medicine is the thing for you?
Yeah, so actually, no one in my family is a doctor. A lot, my parents, relatives, they're all engineers or other professions, but no one has even stepped foot in the medical field. So I didn't really have exposure from a young age to that field. But I'd always been interested in science, especially in middle school toward the start of high school. So I was kind of thinking, in the back of my mind, maybe this is something I could pursue. The thing that really solidified my interest is my parents encouraged me to shadow a doctor, specifically an endocrinologist. And that experience over summer, I think I shadowed him for around 5 or 6 weeks. And that experience was really eye opening. And, I came out of it being like, I don't see myself doing anything else as a career. I mean, this is what I want to do.
Wow. And how was that experience with the endocrinologist? Because you actually picked up that, so I'm going to build on that. What did you do? What was your roles and responsibilities? And how much do you think that contributed to you developing a solid profile for your major or getting into your major at WashU?
Yeah, so my endocrinologist was obviously very nice, letting a high school student shadow him. I probably, cold emailed around 150 to 200 different doctors before a couple of them even said yes. So, I knew as a high school student, not a lot of doctors are willing to let people shadow. So it's kind of a numbers game at that point. And in terms of what I actually did while shadowing, I was able to basically follow, the physician into different patient rooms. I was able to talk to patients myself sometimes and, explain different graphs and learn about all like the treatment and medication strategies. And what really appealed to me was just the logic behind the profession and how each room is has such a variety. Each patient is so different in their treatment strategy, and like developing those treatment and medication strategies requires such a higher level of logic and knowledge that really really fascinated me. So yeah, I was really attracted to the variety in the field.
That sounds brilliant. I mean, it looks like, that was like the thing that made it for you. So that's great.
Yeah.
I also see on your resume that you've done something which is known as Aspiring Scholars Directed Research Program. Can you talk a little bit more about it? How did you get in? Was it a selective research? And what did you do as a part of that?
Yeah, so the Aspiring Scholars Directed Research Program, or ASDRP, is essentially a program in the Bay Area that lets high school students research, either in a wet lab or dry lab environment. It was pretty competitive to get into, but I think there are, a multitude of opportunities, not just in the Bay Area. But I did have to apply, and I think it was relatively competitive. I ended up joining a neuroinformatics lab group. Essentially, it was a neuroscience lab. It was dry lab, and we ran different surveys and different trials, and eventually we were able to publish a paper.
Okay. And that's great. And if somebody who was really wanting to do this program, Aspiring Scholars Directed Research Program, how should they be applying? Since you mentioned it was comparative, you want to be cognizant of the timelines, and what's the process? If you can just kind of run us by that.
Yeah, so I mean, this goes for high school and college students, but finding a lab is a huge decision. So I essentially looked up on Google, opportunities around me, both wet lab and dry lab opportunities. Obviously, there's a lot of universities close by, so I looked into those. I think I, again, emailed a lot of professors at universities. I also applied to a bunch of these programs for high school students specifically, and I like this one the best. I think I got into a couple, um, but I really wanted something neuroscience focused because that was what I was interested in. And so yeah, so I think it's all about the numbers game. I genuinely did the research. I looked at what was around me, talked to older people that I knew, and kind of went from there.
Do you remember which other programs or which other research programs you got into? Since you mentioned you got into couple, and um, why was this particular program so important to you as compared to everything else that you got into?
Yeah, so well, I got into, I applied to a couple of labs at UC Berkeley, and I think one at UCSF. And I think a couple of professors showed interest and were, saying yes to me joining and learning, from their clinical research opportunities. But I really wanted a dry lab neuroscience lab that was very focused and structured. And ASDRP offered that opportunity. It was a very structured program. I also liked that they were pretty prolific in their publishing. I know as a high school student, publishing research papers isn't very doable for a lot of kids. And I actually didn't get published in high school. I got published after. But I saw that a lot of their labs were publishing multiple times a year. And so that was kind of like the tipping point for me, like that their research is meaningful, that they're prolific, and, that they're able to publish in pretty decent journals. That was kind of the tipping point for me.
And I know this question may sound like really naive, but what is the difference between a wet and a dry lab? I mean,
Yeah.
just to somebody who's not from the medicine field, if they were to find this out.
So there's two different types of research labs. I guess maybe three. One is more of a clinical side. That's you're doing human trials, you're whether interventional or not, some sort of patient interaction. Those are usually pretty hard to get into in high school. That's usually more of a college and postgraduate type of opportunity. The other two are wet and dry labs. So wet labs are actual, you're in the lab doing experiments, you're working with cells, cell culture, bacteria, that type of work. And dry lab is more of, you're coding, might be virtual. It could be also be in person, but it's more offline and coding, and maybe you're sending out surveys to people, but it's a very different type of experience. At least in my experience, and now in college, I've had some wet lab opportunities. Wet lab experiences are much more redundant in terms of it's kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again. There's not a lot of variety. Both research experiences are very rewarding, and especially if you're able to publish a paper out of it. But a lot of people also gravitate toward dry lab because just there's more variety, there's more flexibility. um, but on the other hand, a lot of people love the wet lab environment, working in a lab, working with cells, getting your hands dirty. That's also a huge appeal for a lot of people.
I can see the passion in your eyes. That just the thought of wet lab makes you smile. So I'm sure, as an aspiring doctor, it's something that you really want to get your hands down and dirty doing. So
Yeah.
I hear you. For your aspiring scholars directed research program, is it open to international students? Did you have international students in your cohort, or was it just domestic students within the country, or just, yeah, if you have any idea on that?
Yeah, so I think I had out of a team of I think 11 students, we had two international students. Um, One was from China, I believe, and one was from India. And then, even within the US, there were people from all around, not just limited to the Bay Area. That's the advantage of a dry lab group is, since it's virtual, a lot of different people with similar interests can come together to work on the same project. So yeah, people applied from India, from China, and so it is definitely an international opportunity.
That's good to know for people who don't necessarily live in the US but
Yeah.
harbor US dreams to come and study med school there. Are there any such similar research programs which can be accessed by both domestic and international folks in your in like beside in your research that you have done, just so that your research can go to our viewers, listeners, and they can use that better to kind of develop their profile?
I don't know about any specific research programs, but I do know that if you're interested in doing dry lab, getting some dry lab experience, anyone internationally can really email a professor at any school, and try to join their lab. I think professors are very open to international students, especially with a large amount of international students at each college. A lot of private research universities and even public research universities are very, very open to having international students. So I would recommend looking at different universities' websites that you've heard about, and potentially emailing a lot of professors. I mean, at the end of the day, if you had narrowed it down to things that you're super interested in, and are able to reach out to a lot of professors, some of them are bound to say yes.
Wonderful. So, as you rightly said, it just becomes a numbers game. And I
Yeah.
think also the awareness, right? A lot of people are not aware that something like this can be done. There is a dry lab, and there you can be a part of it because any which ways it's virtual and your location is independent. Whether you're living in the US, like let's say you're emailing a professor from Berkeley, but you may not, you could be living in Jersey City, or
Yeah.
New Jersey, and you could still be doing that. It doesn't, you don't have to move to the Bay Area to necessarily be a part of that group. So that's good to know. The second thing that I definitely want to discuss is going to be the Parkinson's Foundation Planning Committee member. Why Parkinson's? Because I think, from my understanding of, when I look at people's profiles and I interview them, one of the things that I've seen is a very deep connection with the cause that they are pursuing, right? I mean, I don't think it's superficial. Why you're like, why not autism and why Parkinson's? So why did you choose this particular cause, and what was your roles and responsibilities while you picked this up, being on the planning committee as a member?
Mhm. So actually, my maternal grandfather has Parkinson's, and I think he's had it for almost as long as I can remember. So, I'm 20 now. I think he's had it for probably 16 or 17 years. And he's living with it. And, I mean, I've grown up seeing the progression of disease affect him. Like, I remember as a kid when he could walk, he could play golf. Now he, can't walk very well without falling, and needs a walker. And so I can see the progression of disease, and I've grown up with that. And so that's kind of that kind of has sparked my pretty deep, like you said, interest in Parkinson's, as a very specific disease, because it is kind of specific, right? um, and yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been interested in neuroscience as a general field, and I think my also personal connection to a specific disease, Parkinson's, also kind of solidified that interest. I had volunteered with the Parkinson's Foundation, a couple of years before that as a kid, with my brother, sister, my mom. It was kind of a family thing. We would go to their events and volunteer. And so one day I reached out via email, and I just reached out to the head of the person of the planner of the event. And I was like, oh, how do I get involved? I'm really interested in this. I have this personal connection. I've always kind of been interested in neuroscience, and I just want to get more volunteer experience. I want to do something to help the community, that I am, by tangent, a part of. And so, yeah, I joined the planning committee of the Parkinson's Foundation. I think I was the youngest member, and it was nothing special, just a yeah, nothing special, as in nothing daunting. It was a just a volunteer organization to raise money and to plan movement events. Like, for example, I was in charge of heading the annual 5K walk. It's called Moving Day, and so we hosted three different ones in the Bay Area, and so each one would raise over 100 to 150 thousand dollars. So it was pretty significant, and it was a great opportunity for me, to kind of get my feet wet in the Parkinson's community and be able to contribute something meaningful to the community that I cared so much about.
That's brilliant. I mean, I love the fact that you took something which is running for your grandfather's generation and made something out of it. I think it shows deep connection, and it's very important to make it personalized. As I said, the profiles that I've seen, they usually have something tied down to their personal life that motivated them to kind of get doing what they're doing. So that's
Yeah.
brilliant to know. I'd also like to speak about summer school. So my question to you is, how important, according to you, is a summer school in this entire high school journey, whether you do it in freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and also if you can address prestige versus exposure debate. Prestige means you get into something which has it's extremely prestigious to get in, which means you need to build your profile to get in, whether it's your scores or everything, versus exposure, meaning you're just kind of understanding what it would entail, but it's not the most selective program. It's definitely prestigious, but not as selective. The acceptance rates are very high. So how important is a summer school, and if you can kind of demystify prestige versus exposure, which one's better, why, according to you, of course.
Sure. Yeah, so personally, I didn't participate in a very competitive summer program. I did one at the Wake Forest University. It was kind of like a medical cardiology program. It was in person, which I think is important, but it wasn't hard to get into or competitive. Of course, it had an application, but I think it wasn't like a Stanford Rise or something like that. And so I also have friends that have done these competitive programs, but at least in my experience, it's really what you get out of it. Those competitive programs, I'm sure, are great for your leadership, building different skills, and also sparking your interest in the topic. But I'm of the belief that these less competitive programs can pretty much give you the same, if not a better experience. Um, my program was specifically titled Journey into the Heart of Medicine, so it was kind of exploring the heart and the whole process of like a patient potentially having a heart attack was kind of the main theme of the program, and the whole medicine journey of the patient from ambulance to ER to outpatient, to hospital, to regular checkups, and what that whole process looks like. And it really opened my eyes into what the field of medicine looks like and how many different, the sheer number of opportunities there are for someone to do. Even if it's not being a doctor, there's nurses, there's paramedics, EMTs, there's PAs, NPs. There's so many different professions that all work together in this one group in the hospital. So I found my program really really fascinating. So in terms of the question of prestige versus what you get out of it, I would lean toward a program that really really interests you. And a lot of programs have their syllabus or what events they do on their website, and if those look interesting and pretty unique and things that you can talk about, I think for admissions officers that goes a long way and even further way than kind of prestige of the program. um, I ended up writing probably a quarter of my essays about this program and what I got out of it, both the skills I learned from it, to even my first experience living alone on a college campus. That was also something I wrote about, and even to the class I took and what that did to spark my interest in medicine. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Do you think having a competitive summer school program or a prestigious summer school program is a make or break on the application? I mean, you're like, just, of course, you already told your experience and how that
Mhm.
felt for you, but just generally looking at your other folks who are not necessarily medicine or even medicine, um, how important it is. Like, does it sway things in your favor if you get into one of the most prestigious selective competitive programs, or no? Again, your opinion.
I genuinely think it doesn't. I mean, maybe very, very marginally, But at least in my opinion, I genuinely believe what you get out of it is 10, 15 times more important than the name of the school or the name of the program that you write on your application. Because at the end of the day, I mean, in most of your essays, you're not even writing the program name. You know, you're just saying this summer program I did this summer. Maybe you'll write the program name in your extracurricular list, but that's honestly something that admissions officers will kind of glaze over and not give a second thought to, even if the name sort of pops out. I genuinely think it's, you should pick a summer program based on what interests you, both the topic and the unique opportunities you get to have.
That is, I think, a great answer, and this also clarifies the air for a lot of people who are
Hmm.
always feel that if you don't get into a competitive program, it's better not to get into anything. Because I just feel that spending a summer away, a few weeks with uh, people from diverse countries and environment just changes your perspective towards life. So I think it's very important, and I second you that you rather go and feel what that looks like rather than saying, oh, you know what, if I don't get into a prestigious selective program, I won't go at all. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and really quickly, I mean, I'm still friends with some of the people some of the friends I made in that program that I still talk to 4 or 5 years later. So I think, even not going to a competitive program that was more collaborative, and had people genuinely interested in the subject matter rather than people who were just, in the program just to be in the program and for the prestige. I genuinely had, great connections that I actually still talk to today.
That's wonderful. I think that is also very important. If all these people, like some days, 10, 15 years down the lane, all of you become like top notch surgeons of the United States, you're going to say, hey, we went to summer school together, so sounds like a lot of fun. All right. So from this point on, we switch gears and, we've discussed the important things on your profile, which I saw. Now we're going to switch gears to academics. What was your coursework like? What was your SAT, ACT score like? How did you write your essays? The application bit of it, what was your thought process in selecting the schools? And the most important question, what is the duration of the med school program? I think I get this asked so many times. So being a med school student, if you can explain what is the regular course of a no like a normal non-accelerated med school program, what should be going, which exam comes where, and then if you can also explain what is BSMD and how some of them can save a year or two, and if you can just give a clear distinction to our viewers and listeners, I think that would help all the people who are doing their research well on this.
Yeah, so as a lot of people know, you take your SATs in 11th, 10th, 11th grade, and you use those to apply for college, SAT or ACT. Then, I'm currently a sophomore in college, and around sophomore or junior year is usually when you take your MCAT. The MCAT is probably one of the hardest, things you'll ever do in college. It requires 3 to 6 months of studying. It's a huge commitment. It's really a lot. There's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of both people competition and also mental competition to be the best, to be a higher percentile, and that one little score difference does matter a lot more than it will in an SAT, for example. So the MCAT is you take that during college, and then you go to med school. After 4 years, or a lot of people take the gap year, just to strengthen their application, to take an extra year to be an adult. Before they go back to school for another, multitude of years. So yeah, I think the norm is that people are taking gap years. I think over 50% of students are. So after you graduate, you go into med school. Med school is 4 years, and it consists of two different kind of sections. So year one and year two are the didactic, the classroom parts. After year two, you'll take your first step, and your first step is essentially like the first portion of your USMLEs, the U.S. Medical Learning Exam, I think is something like that. And so that's step one after your second year of med school. Then year three and four there's no didactic, no classroom. It's all hands-on, all practical application. And then after year four, you'll take your step two, is what it's called. So after you've gotten exposure to working with cadavers, doing, uh, lear- basically applying all of your knowledge in a real sense is when you'll take your step two. And then after med school, you officially get your MD, degree. But to practice, there's a couple more steps. So you have to go through residency. Residency can range anywhere from 3 to 7 years. For example, for surgery, it's closer to 7, whereas for another, a non-surgical field, it's closer to 2 or 3. And so, people will work in the hospital. Residency is a very hard situation. It's, you're working long weeks, 80 to 100 hours. Um, so it's definitely a hard 2 to 7 years. But a lot of people, get a lot out of it. And then once you finish residency, you can finally practice. There's, some people do a fellowship after, and just to get a little bit more specialized, but other than that, then you start practicing. So it definitely is a lot of years down the line. I think, you'll usually graduate and be able to practice around 32 to 35 years old. Um, but, with that comes a pretty rewarding process. And a lot of people who are very passionate about it will go through the process. Um,
And how is BSMD, like the club program, different from this? Is like the regular med school route if a student has to go to like go become a doctor, but how is med school like BSMD slightly different, or is it any different? Do you save years? How does that work?
So BSMD programs are either 7 or 8 years. The majority of them are 8 years, so you're not necessarily accelerating in your timeline, but you're essentially getting guaranteed or easier admission into that university's med school, while you're in high school. And so what that means, quantitatively, is they probably have a lower grade, a lower GPA requirement, probably a lower MCAT requirement. You still have to take it in most cases, but it's definitely a lower requirement than you would have to be competitive at med school applications. So a lot of students elect to apply for BSMDs in high school. I mean, I personally applied to, I think, 7 or 8 different programs. I had early decision to WashU, so I withdrew those other applications. But yeah, I thought it was a great idea, and I still think it's an interesting idea. You get pretty much free admission in a very hard landscape of med school admissions. And so it's definitely a good opportunity for high school students. The only downside is, just like med school, it's very competitive. I mean, most BSMDs have less than 10, sometimes less than 5% acceptance rates. And so, only the top students usually get in. Um, but I would also say, on the flip side, there's really no downside to going the traditional path. As someone who's in the traditional, pre-med to med school journey, I genuinely think I'm having a better experience than I would have had in a BSMD program. I think the competition, I think the striving to do well, I think that's good for me as a person. Um, so yeah, so I'm definitely an advocate for the traditional path, I guess.
But that was a lot of information. I'm so glad you said it because I get asked this so many times, and you just kind of unraveled it completely. So that's good. I just have one question following up to this. When you like before you take your MCAT and after your like 12th grade, which is your I mean your senior year, is there a certain track that you should be choosing in college? Like you are neuroscience at this point in time. Should you be doing a pre-med, or does it have to be biology related or med school related? Because from what I understand, MCAT also has sections that are not necessarily biology only. There's also physics, there's also chemistry. So I'd read up somewhere, I could be completely wrong, that you can do any major of your choice. You could do a biotechnology, you could do, for that matter, you can even do engineering and still take the MCAT exam. Is that correct? If you can just let viewers, listeners know.
Yeah, so being, pre-med or pre-health is not a major, right, at college. It's kind of a track that you're on. And what does that mean? That means that, you're doing different extracurriculars outside of school to strengthen your application. You're taking the pre-med required courses, so you're doing chemistry, bio, physics, biochem, organic chemistry, stuff like that, and some other courses like psychology, sociology. So those are all part of the pre-med track, and then obviously you'll take your MCAT. But I have probably maybe 10 friends that are not biology majors or even minors. I have friends that are economics majors. I have a friend that's an art major who's pre med, and so these people are a completely different major and are just taking the courses required for med schools and to be on the pre med track. But you really don't have to be a biology major. I wanted to do neuroscience because that's what I'm genuinely interested in. But actually, a lot of people recommend you to not be biology majors because it kind of shows a unique side of you. If you're able to major in something different and also interested in medicine, that shows a very unique aspect of your application that a lot of students who are just majoring in biology might not have. So in terms of your major, you can really be anything. You were right in that. Yeah.
Great. So that's good to know that you don't need to have a biology major. On the contrary, not having a biology major works in your favor, except you may probably have to put in a little more work. If you're a biology major, you'll have to probably study physics and chemistry, which is also there. If you were like an engineering major, you'll have to study biology. But irrespective of whatever, irrespective of that, you can still take the MCAT whether you're on a pre-med track, pre-health track or not, for anybody who is kind of still debating that medicine is the way to go or not. So that's good to know.
There will be a lot of overlap between, of course, if a biology major is on the pre-med track, there will be a lot of course overlap, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't take those courses outside your major.
Perfect. So now let's talk about your academics. Med school's super super competitive. So what did your academic landscape look like starting grade 9, which is your freshman year? Yeah.
Mhm.
So how many courses did you take? How many APs did you take? What was your general AP score for the academics piece of your profile?
So I had a unique case, at least in terms of math. I took both calculus APs in middle school. I was kind of advanced in math. So I had a couple APs from middle school, but other than that, I took around 2 to 3 a year. So I took two in my ninth grade year. I took three in 10th grade, three in 11th grade, and then another three in 12th. So I think I ended up with around 12 APs. And I had scored a five on most of them, and I think a four on a couple of them. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I would aim for. Obviously, aim for the fours and the fives. Those are the scores that colleges want to see. Unfortunately, there is a lot of competition, especially in terms of APs. On one hand, taking an AP course can show rigor and can show that you're challenging yourself in your coursework. But on the other hand, if you are not able to do well, it kind of speaks to colleges that maybe you should have taken an honors course instead. Um, but in terms of coursework, I essentially most of my classes were honors and APs. Just looking at my transcript, except for some elective classes. And so I think that showed to college admissions officers that I was able to handle the rigor of of a competitive and at a competitive school and a pretty hard high school curriculum and course load. Um, so I think that's one aspect of it. I think also, the GPA definitely matters. I know a lot of people say it doesn't matter or it might not matter as much, but it definitely does matter. GPA is very, very important. So I think that's definitely should be a lot of students' top priority over some extracurriculars and other aspects of their application. I think one of the main things that got me in is because I had a relatively high GPA.
Can you put a number to the relatively high GPA if you remember?
Yeah, I think so. Our school only had weighted GPAs, but I think my weighted was around a 4.4. And
On
our, I think our school was a 4.8 scale.
Okay. So that was
Uh,
pretty competitive. 4.4 and 4.8 is like,
I think I was outside the top 10%, but I think I was top 15%.
okay. And if somebody wanted to pursue med school or think about getting into medicine, what are the AP subjects that you recommend? Like these are absolutely mandatory that you take it. The rest are just supplementary. It's great to have, but these would be great to showcase on your resume.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, different high schools offer different numbers of APs. But if, just in a perfect world, let's say if your high school offers everything, I would definitely take at least bio and chemistry, and physics if you're also interested in like the engineering side of things. But definitely AP bio and AP chemistry. Um, you know, I took a lot of AP histories. I did microeconomics and macroeconomics, so that's what I was interested in. I did computer science, but I would for sure I would do biology, chemistry, probably psychology, and then definitely like AP calculus or AP statistics or some AP math, for sure.
Great. This is great. Let's talk about test prep. I think with a lot of schools going test optional, there is this perpetual debate on whether somebody should be taking the SATs, somebody shouldn't be taking the SATs. Is it just another data point for colleges to wet out that you are in a competitive setup pool, or it doesn't matter? So, one, did you take the SAT or the ACT, and what was your score? And two, what's your take on this? Like, if somebody wanted to get into med school, whether it's BSMD track, which is even more competitive than the traditional track, or just go the traditional way, should they be taking or aiming to take the SATs, even if the school's test optional?
Yeah, so I know a lot of schools are test optional. I think most BSMDs actually require your SAT scores. And there are some colleges that still require them, like a lot of good colleges, like UT Austin, I know. So there are some colleges that still require it. So my recommendation would just to be take it. There's no harm in doing it, especially if you feel you can get a decent enough score. My score personally was 1550 out of 1600. And so, I took it one time and I was kind of lucky in that I didn't have to take it any more times. Um, but yeah, I definitely would recommend to take it. I wouldn't go with the assumption that schools will be test optional and not take it. I would definitely put in the effort to test prep, whether it's on your own or through a program. I would definitely recommend taking it.
Wonderful. And what were the factors that you kept in mind when you shortlisted colleges? You mentioned that, you did a few colleges and then you kind of ED'd to WashU. So
Yeah.
what was going on in your mind? Like, how should somebody put a list together? I think this is another one that we get a lot. Like, I get asked a lot, and, because the college list is something for your preferences, and also, like, where you fit in
Mhm.
academically and also extracurricular wise. So, how should somebody vet out a comprehensive college list? What should their rationale be? How should they think about going it? And how can they take the lead on this? I don't think, I think a college list is something a student should be taking the lead on, not the parent, and
Yeah.
most definitely not the independent counselor, because it's your life, your career. So, how can you go about doing that?
So I have kind of a non-traditional take on the kind of college list process. And so, some people might not agree, but I personally applied to a lot more colleges than most people do, even the competitive applicants. So I think most competitive applicants apply to maybe it's changed since I applied, but probably, between 16 and 25 ish
Wow.
colleges. I think that's a pretty normal number. I probably applied to 30 something, like in the low 30s. Um, and, you know, it is extra essays for sure. It does require more effort. I definitely did, that was probably the hardest time in high school I worked. Um, but I I know I was talking about the numbers game earlier when emailing, but I genuinely believe it's a numbers game, even for college apps. I think the more colleges you apply to, the higher chance that you have of getting into a good college. In terms of narrowing down your list, though, I did do a lot of research, especially for pre med. One of the main or a couple of the main factors I really looked at was how good that undergraduate institution is at getting its kids into med school. Um, so, some colleges will publish their data and some won't. So, I have to rely on Reddit, on other blog websites, just what people are saying. But I was able to put together a pretty comprehensive list of kind of a general acceptance rate of that college or university to med school. And I was able to compare it with the national average rate, which is 41%, which means 41% of kids who apply to med school actually get in. Um, and so, where I ended up WashU, they actually have a whole table of how high your GPA is and your MCAT, but I think the percentage is around 85, 86%. So, that was one of the main deciding factors on why I ED'd to WashU. But basically, I kind of looked at, how essentially how good are these colleges at getting kids into med school and why, right? So a couple of the factors that might, target that why category are if there's a med school, how easy is it to get research on campus or at the med school? How open is it to like shadowing, and even like proximity, like physical proximity to med school is important. So I looked at all those things, in terms of research opportunities, volunteering opportunities, hospitals in the area, um, and just the opportunities that I would get at college to pursue pre med. Um, because juggling all these different things is difficult for sure. And so, being in an environment that's collaborative and not super hyper competitive, but very open to giving undergraduate students a lot of opportunities, especially in the medical field, was really helpful toward me.
That's great. And how much time should a student set aside to do this research? Because, in your senior year, especially actually in your junior year, you have like 100,000 things that you need to do,
Yeah.
which is your extracurricular activities, your course load gets heavier, you're doing the test prep, and then in all of that, you still have to write your essays. So, ideally, if somebody was certain or, fairly certain that they wanted to get into med school or like, go on the pre med track, how much time in advance that a student should set aside to do this kind of comprehensive research? Because from what I'm hearing a lot of numbers in there. So
Yeah.
digging those numbers out, putting it on an Excel sheet, putting it in a comparative view so that you can clear your head up is what it eventually boils down to. So if you could just tell our viewers and listeners how they can go about doing it and how much time in advance that it would help them with planning.
Yeah, you described it perfectly. I mean, making Excel sheets and writing down the acceptance rates and college names, obviously, and just facts about the college that you're interested in. That's basically what I did. The one thing I would say is start as early as possible. Like you said, junior year, and at least in my experience, second semester junior year is also very tough. Probably the hardest semester academically in high school. So I would recommend starting as early as possible. You don't have to overwhelm yourself with all of the thoughts about which college am I going to go to and all of the related thoughts, but I would definitely start as early as possible. Just start doing research. I mean, and once you start looking for these things, you'll find yourself pretty interested in I mean, this is where you're going to spend the next 4 years of your life, right? So doing that research is number one, necessary, but also, at least in my experience, pretty interesting, to see the differences between colleges, to think and internalize whether, I want to go to a small school, a medium-sized school, a large school. How diverse do I care about the student population? And does location matter? Do I want to be close to home, far from home? All of these things are factors that you should have in the back of your mind as you're entering junior year, and just kind of keep talking about it with your parents, with other people and their experience. If you know older people that have gone through the college application process, I would definitely start, thinking about all those things. And then when it comes to researching all these things for college, like the acceptance rate numbers, the pre undergrad to med school acceptance rate numbers, other things, what people have said about the colleges, I think you should definitely start as early as possible, and just have schools that you've heard about, schools that you look at online, that you've heard from counselors. Just look into everything that you hear and see if maybe they might be a good fit for you. um, I think it's important, especially like I said, because you'll be spending the next 4 years of your life there.
Perfect. Med school's supposed to be very expensive. I get this told by so many people,
Mhm.
domestically and internationally, of course. Like, but generally, like I've not been. You do end up getting scholarships when you're looking at other things, like probably an engineering or something else. But med school just generally ends up being very expensive, and the amount of scholarship is a lot more, and the kind of debt that you get into if your parents are not able to kind of support your education is a lot more. What's your take on that? Is that true, not true? How much money should a prospective parent set aside if they had that kind of money, or plan for to get in loans if they wanted their kid to go through med school, like the entire process, like the pre-med, the MD, whatever, all of that? If that's something that you can shed light on approximately, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm personally, I am lucky enough to not have to pay myself for college, but I will likely have to take loans for med school. And so, like you said, med school is another extension of $90,000 a year, or whatever it is, um, you know, for another 4 years, and you don't start earning until residency, and even then, it's not enough to support yourself and pay off these loans. So A lot of doctors are still paying off their loans until 35, 37, 40 years old. It's a very, very expensive commitment. So what I would say is, while there is a lot of money in the medical field, I would definitely not pursue it unless you're very committed to it. This is something that will take a physical, mental, and financial toll on you and your family and whoever is supporting you, especially if you have to take loans. So I would definitely be introspective about it. I would really double, triple think. Is this really what I want to do as a career? And if you're someone that can't think of yourself doing anything else other than being a doctor, and you really do have that passion, I would say go for it. You'll figure it out, right? Like there are student loans that exist. It's possible to work part time. Med school it's a little bit harder, but in college it's possible to work part time, and then pay off those loans in the future. And I think if it's something you're really passionate about, you definitely shouldn't give up on that for the financial, reasons. A lot of colleges give need-based financial aid. So if you're in a position where you need to where you need scholarships to even attend college, a lot of undergraduate institutions give you need-based aid. So I would definitely not stray away from that path. The other quick thing I would say is, a lot of kids choose to go to maybe considered like lesser competitive colleges, such as maybe a state school or even a university level, but in their state. So it's cheaper for them as opposed to going to a private university or an out of state university. And you can be pre-med anywhere. um, Med schools don't discriminate between what college you go to. It's really about how well you do and what you're able to do outside of college, so what you're able to get out of your college education. So if money is really a concern about going to private or out of state, I would still be confident in yourself that you can definitely succeed at any university. There's no prestige discrimination on that side.
Can you put a number to the amount of money somebody should set aside? Just ballpark, you can just give a range, okay, 800,000 to a million, whatever. I'm just.
Well, I mean, we can even calculate how much it is, right, for to go to med school. So, most med schools are around. If you don't go to a public one, if you go to a private med school, it's $90,000 per year. So plus everything else that you spend money on, it'll come out to around 400K for those 4 years. And then obviously it depends on whether you're going to a public or private university for college. But let's just say you're going private all the way. You're paying 400K plus another basically 400K in college itself. Um, and whether you're doing loans on that or you're paying for it out of pocket, that's still $800,000 that you're going to have to shore up somehow, for this type of education, and you won't start earning until after med school when you start your residency.
Are there any fees for getting matched to residencies or stuff like that? Because I think I was told that every time you apply for getting matched to a residency, that's about 15, 20,000, which is probably, I mean, a very little portion of what you're kind of putting in. But is that the case or no? Am I missing something,
I
or did
don't
I read that
think
wrong?
I don't think it's 15 to 20,000 to apply for resident. I could also be wrong, but at least from people I've talked to and what I've read about, I don't think it's too expensive to apply. There are a bunch of fees that will add up, like taking your MCAT is $500, taking the USMLE, each step is like 1,000 something. So all of these things do for sure add up, even if they're relatively insignificant compared to the total amount you're putting in. But I think to apply to different residencies, you definitely don't have to pay 15 to 20,000 dollars.
Okay, that's good to know. So approximately anywhere between 800 to $900,000 at this current time, is what somebody should have ready with them, which is like a lot of money, but still they should that's what they should have if they're not taking out loans, or then look out for loan options. That's
Well, at
good to
least
know. And
be
this is like on
slightly,
the highest
yeah,
side, like you're going to private college and private med school. Like this is the highest. This is on the
yeah,
higher side.
on the
It
high
can
side.
get lower, but just so that the viewers, listeners, kind of get an idea. Last two questions because we're almost running out of time. um, what was your experience at WashU at the neuroscience track? How is that for you? Like, did you like it? What are things that you like about WashU?
I think WashU is great. I'm really, really glad I went here. It's a medium sized school, which is what I wanted, and specifically for neuroscience, there's just so many opportunities. I mean, we were talking about how many people you have to email to get into a lab. Here, I emailed one professor, and they said yes, and I joined their lab. And so I think that level of opportunity and just openness is something that you can't find at a lot of other schools. The other thing I will speak to is the collaborative nature of WashU. There are a lot of schools where the pre-med culture is very, backstabby, competitive. That's just the reality of it. I mean, you're competing against all these people for a limited number of med school spots. But I think WashU fosters a really, really collaborative environment where people are not afraid to work together to help each other with all aspects of the pre-med journey. Whether that's other students, whether that's teachers, professors, even med school professors. Um, I have reached out to many people and tried to take advantage of those opportunities myself, to just you know take advantage and use what's available to me, and explore and use the collaborative nature that WashU offers. So I'm having a great experience. I think it's a great culture for being pre med, and yeah.
And which kind of a student is not a good fit for WashU? I know I can understand what you're saying is a good fit, but like for somebody evaluating college fit, who would not be an ideal student for WashU?
WashU is definitely, um, I guess you could say it's on the nerdier side, of all these private universities. We're D3, so we don't have a great sports culture. Or if you're looking for a straight party school, WashU is definitely not the place for that. Not to say that there isn't, things to do, and St. Louis is a decent town, is a decent small city, but yeah, I think maybe students who aren't really interested in getting that rigorous of an academic education wouldn't be interested in WashU. But I've met such a diverse subset of people, that I genuinely think a lot of people are able to fit in and find their own unique place here. I think it's a great community that fosters that.
Perfect. And last but not least, what any last piece of advice for people who are looking to apply to med school? Like, anything that you really suggest, any tricks, tips, things to keep in mind, pointers before we wrap up this interview?
Yeah, so when you craft your application, try to craft it around an idea, a topic. For me, it was specifically Parkinson's and neuroscience, and that fed into I wanted to be a neuro major in college. So what I would say is show continuity. Craft your application around a general theme, and explain how that college or university will allow you to explore that theme, that field, that idea further in either coursework, extracurriculars, whatever the college is, offering in their opportunities. I would really be specific per each college. What can you offer me, in terms of I can speak to my experience, like what neuroscience resources do you have? What types of classes do you have? What interests me, and how can I further my education and my interest in this specific field at your university? And I think colleges want to see that. They want to see from high school students that they're providing a very specific educational experience that they as a college cannot, or they as a college can provide that a lot of other colleges can't. So the piece of advice I would say is craft a theme and explain why you want to continue that interest and explore that further on a professional level in college and potentially beyond college.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rohan. This interview was super informative. I think I learned so many things from you, which I did not know, and I think the viewers, listeners will also greatly benefit from them. I really appreciate your time explaining everything. And in case if people have to reach out, we'll probably leave your email address in the
Sure.
description box when we upload this podcast, and I'm sure you can answer all their questions. But again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rima.